And Jerry's traditional name is Red Eagle Woman, and she's a Bear Clan knowledge keeper and a pipe carrier. And Jerry received the Queen's Diamond Jubilee Medal for her work in both social justice and in employment equity. And in 2015, Jerry took on the role of coordinator of the Elders and Residents program here at Dalhousie University. And so today we want to say, we appreciate you and thank you so much for coming to share your knowledge, Jerry.
Thank you so much. And thank you for acknowledging that we're on Mi'kmaq. And I don't know if all the people here are on Mi'kmaq or they're on different territories, but it's very respectful if you would acknowledge the territory you're on and the people who are whose traditional territory that is. So what I'm going to do is give you a blessing. Before I do that, I need to tell you that when I pray to my Creator, and I know that everyone has their own supreme being. So I will invite you to pray with me, but talk to who it is you talk to when you pray. And when I start to pray, I have to introduce myself to Creator so he'll know who I am. And I'll be doing that in my language. Aninsigwa. Nitisnikas besquiginu kwe, makwa dodem, nagawe kwenin, kizagus. Gizok, Chimanitu, we honor you with this prayer. We are the descendants of those you so long ago chose to live in harmony on Turtle Island. We acknowledge your gifts of life and knowledge. We direct our attention to the life forces of Mother Earth. We give thanks for all we have, our food, our water, air, shelter, and so many beautiful beings who are our brothers and sisters. We give thanks to the rivers and streams which supply us with water, and to all herbs which furnish medicines for the cure of our illnesses and diseases. We give thanks to the moon and stars which have given us their light when the sun is gone. We give thanks to the sun that has looked upon the earth with a beneficent eye. Creator, we ask that your spirit dwell within each one of us and allow us to listen with open hearts and minds as we learn about the first peoples. We pray that when we work together to find ways to support those who need it, all my relations, Sit Nokmak, Tahoe. Before I leave, I want to discuss give you some on some of the, attitudes, I guess you're probably going to be discussing. And what I found this on Facebook, and I thought it was such a nice little story. Well, actually there's 6. So what the title of this, and I didn't write it, someone else wrote it. So what the title of this is called 6 Little Stories with Lots of Meaning. So the first one says, once all villagers decided to pray for rain. On the day of prayer, all the people gathered, but only one boy came with an umbrella. That's faith. When you throw babies in the air, they laugh because they know you will catch them. That's trust. Every night we go to bed without any assurance of being alive the next morning, but we still set the alarms to wake up. That's hope. We plan big things for tomorrow in spite of zero knowledge of the future. That's confidence. Suffering, but still, we get married and have children. That's I'm sorry. You never heard me at all?
No, we did. I'm sorry. I wasn't sure if I should interrupt because I didn't know if it was just me or not. But we heard you most of the way. I think we got to trust.
No,
Love?
yes.
Okay.
Oh, love. Okay.
So the last one says, on an old man's shirt was written a sentence, I am not 80 years old. I am sweet 16. with 6 to 4 years of experience. That's attitude. So let's all keep those attitudes. Have a good meeting. And thank you very much for listening to me.
Thank you.
That's great. Thank you so much, Jerry, and thanks for being us today to share some of your knowledge. Yeah, we appreciate you.
Thank you very much.
This lecture series is engagement with racism really comes at a critical time, and I'm really thankful that Jerry kind of shared that story. I think it's something definitely to reflect in our conversation today. But this conversation comes at a pretty critical time where Black Lives Matter protests have once again rallied around the call that the lives of Black and Indigenous and other communities of color are not expendable. Calling for things like the reform of law enforcement and other public institutions. It's also right now is the time where planners and architects really have to reflect on our practices and how we've aided in the loss of life and property for some of these same communities. So for us as designers, as architects, and as planners, this really means kind of questioning how design spaces are really embedded with power structures that tend to stratify our society, and how practitioners are sometimes really implicated in this. So just as importantly, we also need to really acknowledge that this is, of course, not a new conversation or a new area of analysis, but communities of color have continually engaged with this kind of work through their daily experiences, and certainly by resisting oppressive regimes and policies. And racialized communities have also developed their own planning and design practices in cities when they haven't been heard by these spaces of power. So this lecture series really builds on some of this summer's powerful responses to racialized violence by presenting some of the work of practitioners and activists and scholars who have kind of pursued these acts of anti-racism as really a central focus of their work. So we really hope to kind of make connections and find synergies between some of these diverse sets of practices that are going to provide some new insights as we kind of pursue racial justice through both our practice and just in our cities. But before I turn it over to EC to introduce our speaker, Craig Wilkins, I just want to ask that everyone be sure their microphone is off. And I also want to say that we're going to end with a Q&A session. So please type any questions that you have into the chat, and we'll get to as many of them as we can. So I'm going to turn it over to EC now, who is an MArch student here at Dal, who's going to introduce our speaker.
Thank you, Lisa. All right. So we have our guest speaker today, who's Craig Wilkins. He's an architect, author, critic, and 2017 National Design Award winner. He serves on the faculty of the University of Michigan College of Architecture and Urban Planning, where he teaches the courses on design and social justice. He is recognized as one of the country's leading scholars on African American in architecture and a hip-hop architectural theorist. His creative practice specializes in engaging communities in collaborative and participatory design processes. His books, essays, articles, and public talks explore the rich social, cultural, political, historical, and aesthetic contributions of often ignored practitioners of color. His essays have been published in the Journal of Architectural Education, International Review of African American Arts, Art South Africa, Volume, Minneapolis, Star Tribune, and the Detroit News, amongst others. He currently is the creative director of the Wilkins Project, a social justice and strategic design alliance that provides architectural, urban design, and planning services, public interest design solutions, and expertise in engaging public discourse. His practice includes both written and built work. So we want to welcome you and say we're very happy to have you with us today.
Thank you very much. I'm beyond pleased to be with you today. I want to thank Lisa and yourself and the faculty and staff at the school, all those who were involved in making this happen. And I also want to make sure I want to thank the students as well for attending. Hopefully, you won't be too bored. If you are, then just send me an email and I'll know that I have cured insomnia. That'd be great. And I do appreciate the opportunity. This is going to be a little, I don't know, maybe less than traditional, but I'm going to give it a shot. And let's see if we can get rolling here. We have a lot to talk about. Yeah. Okay. So, in all honesty, I struggle with what exactly I can discuss with you this evening. That might be different and interesting, but also focused on the topic of this lecture series. However, I think there are others who can and are already speaking to the topic of anti-racism and doing it very well. The group Black Space, Dark Matter University Collective, etc. And I felt it was rather redundant for me to do the same. Perhaps some in attendance may have expected to hear about work in Detroit, specifically, given that the city is a microcosm of all the problems and promise of the American urban landscape. Indeed, Detroit is the nation's concerns on steroids. It is a UNESCO design heritage site that is simultaneously threatened by abandonment and redress through demolition on the left and laissez-faire gentrification on the right. I thought maybe I would talk about past or present work and collective efforts that attempt to address these bifurcated conditions, strategies and tactics, methods deployed, lenses utilized, allies joined, lessons learned, etc. All these things are important and need to be discussed, yes, but the more I considered it, the less convinced I was this was the route I wanted to take. That information is already readily available and being added to constantly. So this evening, I'm choosing another road, one less traveled, especially in our field, hoping it will make all the difference. With the help of others, I'd like to tell you a story shared with me by the landscape, by people, and by design. Now, I'm a fan of stories. The grand, bland, and everything in between tales we tell ourselves about our beliefs, our desires, our needs, our past, our futures, and our places. Tales of the beautiful and sublime have been linked to the practice of architecture for centuries. In fact, it has been said of architecture, the will to form is also the will to inform. That the desire to build something is really the desire to say something. For those intimately engaged in the construction of environments, the something said, the story, is beyond important. It is central. Because in a sense, we bring ourselves into being through these stories we tell. And in turn, we shape our world, our homes, our neighborhoods, our work and play spaces, our cities, and yes, even our countries to match those stories. Yet, not all stories are told boldly. Not all are embraced equally. Some are blessed with recognition, adulation, and the gift of time. Others, not so much. Some become so familiar, we no longer recognize them as stories. We call them reality, truth, a fait complete. The adoption of popular stories into a kind of reality does not mean tales less told are any less worthy. They are simply harder to hear. I'm speaking of the parallel stories that run alongside the popular, the ones foundational to, yet obscured by, the ones we most fervently embrace. The silenced stories, those not tabbed with the gift of time, the ones kept alive by the few, hidden but not, just below the surface, a not so secret, known but unknown, stories upon which grander stories stand, the ones that, when added to those repeatedly told, thickens both the telling and the meaning. Now, the loss of these less told but not less worthy stories do us no favors, for their silence limits what we can become, both individually and collectively. Intentionally or not, Telling only portions of carefully crafted stories keeps us from the fullness of our being, and as such, the rich landscape that might result from that fullness. Thus, it is critical for designers tasked with shaping our shared environment to question which tales get heard, valued, and remembered. To ask about our work and within our work, whose stories are we telling and why? Why these stories and not others? Are we delegitimizing, ignoring, dismissing, or introducing, adding, flowering, and making richer, fuller these stories? How is architecture shaped by the tales we don't spread? Can architecture honor a specific narrative while acknowledging the many threads that make up its entirety? And can the reverse be true as well? Now, I'd like you to keep these questions in mind as I tell you my story. In the spring after my father passed, I was feeling some kind of way. In less than 2 years, I'd lost both my parents, and I was trying to reconcile the fact that the two biggest influences in my life were no longer physically available to me. While I was by no means alone, I have uncles and aunts and cousins and nieces and nephews in Chicago, throughout the country, and beyond. My immediate family was rather small, just my mother, my father, my brother, and me. Well, I was feeling lost. A few years back, I began researching some families important to a book project that I was working on. And as an aside, I also began doing just a bit of research on my own kinfolk as well. And heading into the summer of 2018, I thought it might be a good time for me to return to both those projects. However, I came across a piece in the New York Times that would change all that. Perhaps due to my own moment of remembrance, I was struck by the piece, and soon there would be more. In this essay, the author wrote about the finding of the Clotilde, the last ship ever to bring kidnapped people for enslavement into America. Now, I was fascinated by the entire tale. I'd lived primarily in this country for almost 60 years and never heard a single mention of this event in my entire life. And I was angry about it.
This community was started by the Africans who were on the last illegal slave ship to arrive in America. Killed. 5 years after they were brought here, the end of the Civil War set them free, and they started the only African-run town in America. Grammy Award-winning musician Rhiannon Giddens and I are here with Joel Billingsley, who brought us here to see the monument honoring her great-great-grandfather, Kazula, one of the founders of Africatown.
Kazula happens to be the one we know the most about, right? Just because he lived longer and he shared his story in a way that allowed us to learn about it now. Wow.
My grandmother was born in 18-something, so her mother was a slave. So she could talk to me about what that was. That forms us in interesting kinds of ways. I mean, people always talk about slavery like it's ancient history.
Yeah.
It is not. And lasted a long time.
Yeah. In Africatown, they grew their own food. They established their own community based on what they did in their homeland, based on their traditions. And so as you sort of move through the decades, you'll see that that community at one time, when it was thriving, had everything you needed. Didn't have to go anywhere, to go to the grocery store, see a doctor, to be educated, or even have some entertainment. Everything you needed to live was right here in the community. And so when you talk to people, they have so much pride in what it used to be. One time it was 12,000 people. Now it's 2,000. Now we're trying to revive Africatown. We have a place called Kazula, named after my great-great-great-grandfather.
first black person I ever seen play a banjo?
That's the question. That is the question, because it was like I grew up seeing white people play the banjo and kind of going, oh, that's cool, but it's not part of my culture. And then I found there are some recordings of the black players of this music. And then as I started to dig, and this used to be a huge tradition. It was an enormous tradition all across, not just the South, but all across the country. So I know the banjo as this: metal strings, metallic instrument, often played bluegrass style. And then I learned that the banjo was an African-American instrument, so it looked more like this. It was known by everybody as a black instrument. The emblem of being black was the banjo. Then you have a change in the 1820s and 30s, and that's when white folk started going, that's really cool, I would like to play that. So you have white entertainers picking up the banjo. The reason why we don't talk about this shift is because the white folks playing this banjo would have been doing it in blackface. This entire industry becomes the blackface minstrel show. It's the most popular form of entertainment for over 60 years.
Are you saying that what we know as bluegrass today actually began with African Americans?
100%. That's
Wow.
exactly what we're saying.
Yeah. Wow.
So are you saying the original do-si-dos was an African American thing?
So way back when you have nothing but dances as entertainment and you have plantations, the musicians for these balls are African American.
Almost always.
And so they are forced to learn European dances, European music, and then they're themselves mixing it. The thing that sets apart American square dancing and country dances from Europe is the calling. You don't have callers, and that's the thing that you think, do-si-do, and around and around you go, and grab your partner, and up and down you swing that style of gal around. That stuff. These are the innovations that make this music uniquely American, are African American. I've done a lot of research about time of slavery, and I was looking at advertisements where people were putting ads in the paper to sell people. And I saw one in particular was for a young woman who was for sale. And at the end of the ad, it said that she has with her a 9-month-old baby who was at the purchaser's auction. And I don't know, those words just really stuck with me, and thinking about her in particular. I got a baby, shall I keep him? 'Twill come the day when I'll be reaping. But how can I love him any less? This little babe upon my breast. You can take my body, you can take my bones, you can take my blood, but not my soul. You can take my body, take my bones, you can take my blood, but not my soul. You have this lineage here. You have this connection historically to that last ship that was sent over here. You know where you come from. I don't know necessarily where my family comes from in the same way, but musically, I know my lineage. There's more than one way to be connected to who we are as a community. It's not just blood.
In the gathering place right behind Kazula, the Africatown community assembles to commemorate their ancestors. Family and friends, in the presence of God, we come to pour our libation in memory of our faith and blood. Growing up not far from here, I would never have imagined the traditional African ceremony survived in Alabama. When we pour libation, we awaken the ancestors. We talk to them. We're going to pour forth water to symbolize the richness of our inheritance, to symbolize how nourishing is the earth, which has fed our lives and all our previous generations. In response to each pouring, I would like for you to respond, Ashe, which means so be it. Repeat after me, Ashe. Ashe. For many years, those Africans from the Clotilde held rituals and rites and buried their kin in this sacred space. If you would, call out the names of those who you have buried. Kazula. Ashe. Kupoli Allen. Ashe.
I was angry because as a Black person in America, I'd been deprived of this knowledge on purpose. And that purpose sits at the heart of my country today like a cancer, rotting any attempt at recovery and healing. Its malignancy spreading into every aspect of society, infecting the population and preying on those whose immune systems are weak and damaged by the notion of white supremacy. But I was also angry as an architect who studies race and space, who works in distressed communities, because I could see in this impossible place one of the most unique spaces in the history of my country, if not the slave trading world. The same kinds of nefarious, malicious, de facto and de jure acts of oppression and suppression many Black spaces face every day, often violently at the hands of private and public perpetrators. Spaces like the African Burial Ground, a cemetery for free Blacks in pre-Civil War New York that was paved over in the name of progress. Sugarland Plantation, the site of unmarked graves of leased convicts who were literally worked to death. The free Black self-financed enclave of Seneca Village that was deemed blighted and taken without adequate compensation so that the land could be used to extend Central Park. Tulsa's Black Wall Street, the destruction of a thriving Black business district by a mob of white men jealous of Black prosperity. Robert Morris, the commissioner who bulldozed communities in favor of highways and who continue to venerate the men most responsible for the nation's problematic racial past as heroes worthy of honor and praise. Even street names demonstrate a particular cultural importance, a hierarchy, communicating a history that is valued. These are but a few of the countless examples of how the landscape in which we work is fraught with stories seldom told, stories buried for expediency, stories silenced out of shame. It's part of a decided, dedicated, and never-ending assault on Black claims to place, a finely tuned, well-coordinated, and legally sanctioned removal of the Black presence from the landscape. And that troubles me greatly as an architect, but also as a Black citizen of America.
Up until the late 50s, Africatown was its own incorporated area. But Mobile began to court Africatown, and in the 60s, the city rezoned from residential to heavy industry because they wanted to get those taxes from those industries. So I can understand people in the area feeling as if they have been forgotten because they would just like to bulldoze everything in here, move these 2,000 people out, and just industrialize the rest of it. They figure if they ignore you and just let your house fall down, your people die off and buy off your land, then that's what they'll do.
So, fueled by this recognition, I just started calling people who were mentioned in the various articles. I didn't know who they were. They were only mentioned. Some of them had no affiliation. I just called, to offer what services I could to whomever might find them useful and whenever they might be needed. As others have written, I myself as well, the concern for me is that space is life. From Jamestown to your town to my town to any town USA, Black access to space to tell our painful, joyous, complicated, confused, loud, incomplete stories has been and remains today severely curtailed, always and in all ways. This is no accident. The power of space is real. Control of it is always already of vital political, social, and economic interest. The erasure of Black landscapes in all their fullness remains a frequent tactical deployment of that power to support those interests. Without acknowledgement by sanctioned scribes, governments and agencies, institutions, landowners, banks, developers, police, schools, fellow citizens, and the like, all of which who have yet to grant Black landscapes long-term legitimacy and lease, Black claims to space are tenuous at best, treasonous at worst. Now, sanctions aside, Black people in my country have never forgotten their presence in the landscape. It's been too hard earned. A tale passed from generation to generation beyond the reach of official recorders. If anything, it's the scribes and their audience who've forgotten, or perhaps more accurately, adopted a stance of willful ignorance. Now, if space is life, then any attempt to limit access to it is, in my opinion, a crime. Not metaphorically, but an actual crime. Now, according to Encyclopedia Britannica, a crime is more than just a simple violation of the law, an offense against governmental authority. It violates human relationships and injures victims, communities, and even the offenders themselves. And if we understand these acts of erasure are really crimes that violate human relationships, what might those who understand space best, those for whom the health, safety, and welfare of the public through its stewardship of the built environment, do to investigate, analyze, and provide evidence of such crimes to those who might have the power to prosecute the perpetrators? And it was here that I became interested in the work of L. Wiseman at Forensic Architecture. If you're unfamiliar, Forensic Architecture is a research agency investigating human rights violations, including violence committed by states, police forces, militaries, and corporations. Forensic Architecture's investigations employ pioneering techniques in spatial and architectural analysis, open source investigation, digital modeling, immersive technologies, as well as documentary research, situated interviews, and academic collaboration. Through their pioneering work, Forensic Architecture has shifted the lens on what architecture and architects can do. So it was with this perhaps novel, maybe not quite thought out idea, I began to think about how I might engage in the ongoing work in Africatown, both professionally and personally, until that call came. Clearly, there were multiple crimes committed here. The ones for which Timothy Mayer and Captain William Foster were tried, yes, but those were crimes against the government. What about the people for whom the government didn't include? What are the crimes against them? It was my position that a plethora of crimes had been committed on the bodies of Africatown residents since its inception and continued up into this day. So, taking a cue from Wiseman, I meant to find and expose as many of those crimes as possible. So last winter, as a visiting fellow in spatial justice, I headed a research workshop at the University of Oregon School of Architecture and Environment. at workshop included architecture and historic preservation students who were brave enough to take on this admittedly atypical architectural exploration. From what we could understand from the material that was available to us prior to our investigation, we considered that there might be several crimes that we might want to look into. Kidnapping and human trafficking, obviously, insurance fraud, ongoing human rights violations, theft, the perpetration and perpetuation of health and environmental inequity, and spatial access inequity, or spatial justice. So the hypothesis of kidnapping and human trafficking was pretty obvious, right? It should be clear to anyone that Timothy Mayer's claim that he could, and I quote, bring a ship full of niggers right into Mobile Bay under the officers' noses, end quote, was a violation of national laws, as by the time importing people for the purposes of slavery had been abolished for half a century. As to the possibility of insurance fraud, we found that in his published journals, Captain Foster admitted the slave ship Clotilda was intentionally scuttled and burned to hide evidence of the crime of kidnapping and trafficking 110 Africans to Alabama. The ship was also insured, and they submitted a claim to recoup the loss of the ship, which was paid. This is the very definition of fraud. As to the theory of ongoing human rights violations, we found that the Mayer family, through their vast land holdings in and around Africantown, continued to support the establishment of heavy industry that leaves the air and land contaminated and unhealthy. And they refused to release this, the very least, the symbolic hold over a community they never had any right to control in the first place. Theft. We found that with malice and forethought, Africantown has been historically and systemically excluded from conversations for just and equitable spaces in the state of Alabama. The environmental degradation, devaluation, and incremental taking of their land by others, often facilitated by the state, are all acts of theft. They represent a deliberate, unabashed, and ongoing taking from the citizens of Africantown and their spatial resources, and the resulting benefits therein that knowingly deny them their basic right to life. Health and environmental inequities abound. General health and well-being of a community is greatly influenced by the social, economic, environmental conditions where people live, learn, work, play, worship, and age. And racial and ethnic health disparities are well documented at the state and national levels. There is a class action suit that has been filed against the surrounding industries by the citizens of Africantown. Due to decades of pollution, it's common for the residents to pass away before they turn 65, many as a result of cancer. And finally, to the spatial inequities, Africantown is a prime example of decades of planning and economic research that consistently and overwhelmingly reveals a long legacy of national and local racism. Here, rail and utility lines, interstate roadways, and roadway decisions are frequently deployed to reinforce unspoken divides, wall off the community, and block expansion. Such decisions reduce or eliminate access to affordable goods, services, schools, and parks. Over time, they disproportionately burden the community with health problems and unjustly lowers the value of their property. Alas, we'd only begun our efforts on the site when the pandemic hit, and we were unable to return to do further research and reconstruction work based on our initial hypotheses and findings.
They started Africantown with a meek and humble beginning.
They wanted to make this their Africa. They wanted everything right here.
This community at one time was self-sustaining, had barbershops, grocery stores, cleaners, everything that you needed
We had fruit trees everywhere. Everybody had chickens and gardens. There was always something cooked at somebody's house, and they cooked on wood stoves.
Africatown was family. Everyone looked out for each other. It was a place where we had pride.
Despite the current conditions it now faces, or the titular crimes with which we've only begun to collect evidence, Africatown has overcome far more obstacles than can ever be told, put on paper, or tried in any court, except perhaps that of a higher power, should you believe in that sort of thing. While my part in this 5-century-long narrative has only barely begun, there are 3 things that I've learned so far that I'd like to share with you. The first is that despite what you've heard and what I've told you, there is an abundance of life in Africatown. People laugh, play, love, worship, get married, raise families, and otherwise command their place in the world. They have assets that over the past few decades are finally being recognized. Attempts at preservation are being established. Funds are being allocated. Attention is being paid, and rightly so. For well over 2 centuries, they have affirmed their culture and honored their ancestors. These people, many of whom are descendants of the town's founders, have refused to be defeated. Their perseverance is both astounding and humbling. They believe in their right to land, to space, to history, to legacy, to justice, to equity, to life. They believe that Black landscapes matter, and I wholly agree. The second is that this work has revealed to me the healing potential of architecture. Now, Michael Murphy at Mass Design Group has preached this for over a decade. Architecture is more than just an object. It is unique in its abilities to understand the tales, the stories that the landscape freely shares if we choose to listen. Those of us in this field can either amplify those stories, help recover those stories, or help to bury them, to erase them, to stamp them silent. Now, this is a choice. This university sits on the Mi'kmaq land, and it has taken over, until now, to acknowledge that fact. And that's great. The acknowledgement is important, and many universities and institutions are following suit, mine included. But what exactly does that mean, really, when the occupation is complete? The resource extraction has denied wealth to those from whom the space was taken, when it is, for all intents and purposes, after the fact. I mean, acknowledgements only go so far. What's next? Well, maybe not erasing histories in the first place would be something we want to consider. Now, I'm much more of a scholar these days than anything else, so I have a particular affinity to research. But wherever you find yourself in this field, in practice, the thinking through making, or in scholarship, the thinking through writing, research remains critical. If you can erase history, then you can erase presence. If there's no presence, there's no claim, now or in the future. If there's no claim, there's nothing to hold anyone accountable for past, present, or future injustices. All abuses, all experiences are if they'd never happened. As an architect, I'd rather not be used as a tool in that process. History is important, place even more so. For Black people in America, both are critical. The evidence of our places, our presence, is key in resisting total erasure. It is also key to understanding our journey, our resiliency. whether through agency or assignment, Black landscapes matter. Every Black person in America has to be somewhat of a historian, not as a curiosity, a hobby, a buff, or academic or professional study or pursuit, but as a condition of survival. In a country where your zip code is the most accurate predictor of your life opportunities and life expectancy, in a system where home ownership is the biggest investment one can make to guarantee full prosperity and wealth creation, what does it mean that Black spaces are always temporary? Black claims to space are always tenuous or treasonous, always subject to reclamation and erasure. In my work, anti-racism begins with strengthening these claims, preventing erasures, and valuing Black spaces and the people in them, seeing their lives as worthy of my professional protection, and to make even my smallest choices count towards that end. This is why Africatown is so important, both personally and professionally. Anti-racism isn't a strategy, a tactic, a project, or a fad. It is a way of life, a commitment to seeing your environment and your role in shaping it truthfully, of asking whose stories are not being told, who's not being invited to speak, who's not at the table, why, and what can I do about it? Anti-racism is about equity, yes, but in the end, it's about justice. In study and practice, in theory and application, you cannot truly claim to have a just society where racism exists. They are simply incompatible visions of the world. Histories are not lost or forgotten. They're erased on purpose. And I'm here to prevent that. Now, the third and last thing I'd like to share with you is that should any of what I've said resonate with you, especially about the Reclamation Project in Africatown, then this is my gift to you.
She took souls on a horrible trip. Her morning song was the crack of a whip. Once you survived that a long time ago, most of them buried out at Old Plateau. But the pain and the memory will never go away. The spirit still lives by the shores of the bay. Matilda's on fire off the Alabama coast. Matilda's on fire. We're still living with her ghost. It was a dirty secret, forgot but not forgiven. But the shame was so great, she could not stay hidden. She's on fire.
Yes, keep an eye out for the future dates of the Africatown Design Ideas International Competition. Much of the work I've shown and much more that I haven't will be part of the base package for that competition. So I'll end here with this chapter, but this story is not over. In fact, it's just beginning. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the presentation you gave. It was really good. Well, more than good. It was very enlightening, especially for me, someone who is a Nigerian, and so watching the video and seeing a whole lot of my own heritage in the video as well, still persistent in other cultures, was pretty good. We want to head over to some questions. I hope you're ready to answer some questions about what you just gave. And just to start you off,
other stuff.
Sorry?
I said, or other stuff as well.
Yes, definitely. And anyone is free to give compliments or their own theory or thoughts. So first question, I'm not, definitely. The question that was asked is, as an educator, how have you told these missing narratives of Black history and / heritage to your students?
I don't know. I'm not quite sure I understand the question, but how have I told them? Just like I've told today. I mean, you just tell them. I mean, you know, it's you know, a lot of folks, you know, not a lot of folks, everybody is ignorant of something, you know, nobody knows everything. You know, oftentimes folks don't know what they don't know. And so I feel it's incumbent upon me as an educator to provide as much information and as much context about the world in which we live in as I know. So it's just part and parcel of my pedagogy. You know, it's just sort of the way in which I see the world. And I think that's why, I think that's what every educator brings to their classroom is a unique way of seeing the world. And they share that with their students. So that's, you know, I'm hopefully I'm answering the question, but that's how I do it.
Okay, thank you very much. I guess I'll ask another question. This is kind of sort of based off my own thesis. In terms of occupying space and just kind of linking it back
just
to
hijack the whole thing just for your thesis, man. That's kind of, you can email me later, man. You're just gonna hijack the whole show for your thesis.
It relates to this actually.
Thesis.
Huh?
It relates to this actually. I'm kind of juxtaposition it to the Africville community here that also undergone the same kind of erasure. Do you believe, and this is a question that I always had, if I ever had a chance to ask you, from what you're speaking on the project you're about to undergo before COVID happened, it seems like you believe that this public identity can be brought to light. The erasure that's happened can be healed. Do you mind expanding more on like the kind of solutions you've thought about when going through Africa Town and how to deal, what kind of things or interventions you would do to kind of bring that identity that was erased back into the limelight?
I didn't have any sort of preconceived notions. I don't have any now about Africa Town. As I mentioned, there's a thriving community there. There's nothing that I need to, in a sense, as a designer, bring back. It might be something that you want to enhance, something that you want to elevate, but I'm not. It's not a tabula rasa. It's people live and exist in this place, and they know way more about it than almost anyone. You know, even folks who have done quote unquote academic research enough to write books on it. So I think that, as a designer, we have to sort of start with what's on the ground, right? There's always someone or some place or something or some agency or some area that knows more about the area or the place that we're working in than we do. They live it. That's their life. And so, you know, I always try to, I seek those sources out. Usually those sources are the ones who come to me for work, so I don't really have to do that much seeking, but it's imperative that we sort of engage these communities and their histories. And again, they are living histories. They're living communities. They're living. I'm not sure what I want to say there. Cultures that. And so I see my job really is as a way of sort of enhancing a voice that has not been heard, or is not respected, or is not being granted an opportunity to speak and be part of the larger conversation about wherever it is, whether it's a city, whether it's a rural area, whether it's a suburb. These folks are these areas often are spoken for, not spoken with. And you know, so I see my job as being part of that effort to bring these voices to life. Sometimes that requires, you know, some sort of physical intervention. Other times it's simply how to design a process so that people can participate in, you know, planning decisions. They can have their voices heard about resource allocations. Sometimes it's designing or creating a way to disseminate information that is useful and provides people with the kinds of tools to protect themselves and to advocate for the things that they want. I have a studio right now that is in the process of, it's a seminar course. It's in the process of trying to figure out ways to disseminate some of the research, and you know, they're coming up with, you know, all kinds of different methods of doing that. One, there's a group that's doing a graphic novel, you know, trying to address a younger generation. There's a group who is attempting to try to write a children's book to pass on this information. There's another group that is taking I don't know if you're familiar with the Center for Urban Pedagogy, CUP, in New York. They're putting together a brochure that people can carry around with them that, you know, talks about, you know, that creates or defines a lingo that developers use and planners use. It's sort of like a pocket dictionary, so that they are able to understand conversations if they go to policy meetings. If people come to their community to say, this is what we're planning on doing there, you know, they don't feel as if they can't respond because they don't know what's being discussed. So there are all these ways in which you can, I don't like using the term empower, because the power is already there. There's all these ways in which you can unleash that power. Those ways in which you can provide access for that power to reach the places that it needs to reach, to be felt, to be heard, to be respected, and to be engaged. So.
Thank you very much. We have some questions from the audience, one from Bill and one from Andrea.
Really? You don't want to talk about your thesis anymore?
That's for an email later.
That's very kind of you. I appreciate that. I'm sure your fellow classmates appreciate that as well.
I think it's always useful to ask questions. So Bill asked, how did you build trust with the Africatown residents so that they would come to the table, participate, and engage?
That's still an ongoing process. I haven't built trust. I am building trust, and I think you're always building trust. You know, that really that takes a while. It takes a while, which is why I'm, you know, I'm still, you know, in a sense, still seen as let's just say wary. You know, it's you just sort of have to be, in a sense, open and earnest. You know, I think you know, oftentimes I think folks who are coming into you know, sort of communities to work come with a kind of attitude that is not useful, and you have to, in a sense, be aware of that and just shed it, just leave it. You also have to be willing to be, in a sense, tested. And you also have to be willing to be criticized. If you're thin-skinned, then that's not the kind of work that you want to do. If you are, say, an authority, if you're bossy, that's not the kind of place, that's not the kind of stuff that you want to look. We come as designers, we come with a particular kind of expertise. That's why we're in school. That's what we're learning. That's what we practice. We have skills. We have an expertise, but it is not the end all and be all. Other people have expertise as well. And if you want to be respected, then you have to respect their expertise as well. That's the way in which something great happens, is when, you know I don't have that knowledge, but that person does, that person I'm working with, so I'm going to respect them and they're going to respect me, and we're going to figure out ways in which we can both leverage what each other knows. And the more voices that you have at the table, the more of a menu you have to use and to choose from, to sort of, you know, make the dinner, so to speak. And it's much more nourishing when you can do that, but that takes time. You know, I have a colleague who says, you know, we move at the deliberate speed of trust, and that's true. You know, you cannot really do anything substantive unless people trust you. And you know, I think most of the times people appreciate honesty. They appreciate openness. They appreciate curiosity. Like, you don't come in pretending to know everything about a place, right? It's not, you can't. Like I grew up in Chicago. I've done work in Chicago, but there are parts of Chicago that I don't know those neighborhoods as well as I know the places that I grew up in, and I'm in that same city. So, I don't know. Hopefully I'm answering the question, but it's really a process. It's always a process. But being honest would be and being earnest, and being willing to be rejected. Like, some people just don't want to work with you. They have that right. And yeah, don't take it personally. You know, it could have been the person that they worked with before that gave a bad taste in their mouth. It has nothing to do with you. So all these things, you know, these things you have to take in consideration. You have to be empathetic.
Thank you very much for that answer. Andrea asks, as someone who isn't a person of color,
is Andrea on here? Andrea, put on your screen, unmute yourself and ask the question. Well, she's not here, so I'm not going to answer that question.
Hi, I was just really nervous too.
Why? You're in a box. I can't get you. I can't reach you.
My question was, as someone who isn't a person of color, how can one ensure that projects are sensitive to the views, stories, and experiences of all communities involved?
Surround yourself with people who are in those communities. I mean, that's really the simplest answer. Ask who's not at the table. You know, why aren't they at the table? Those are the voices I need to hear, or the voices I would like to hear, or we need to hear, not me. We need to hear. It doesn't. I mean, this isn't. I mean, doing work in so let's say distressed communities or very sort of rich, or areas that are rich with a kind of historical narrative or a history of a particular kind of culture. You don't have to necessarily be of that culture to be useful and bring something worthy to the table. But you also have to understand that that you need partners. You need people who are willing to work with you, and you are willing to work with. So you surround yourself with those people. Mass, I'm a fan of mass design. Mass design, they are a very diverse firm, but they are still predominantly white, and they work in all kinds of neighborhoods and communities and countries, and do it very, very successfully. So it's not necessarily a racial thing. It is a process thing. Like, who do you have around you?
Thank you very much.
Sure.
There's a question from Yvonne.
From who?
I don't know. Yvonne. I don't know. I do not know.
Well, Yvonne, are you here? Unplug yourself. Ask your question. If she's not here, we don't need to answer it.
I'm here, but I'm unable to start my video.
Okay. All right.
Sure.
Go ahead. I see your face. Go ahead.
Right. So I want to thank you for a wonderful presentation.
Thank you.
And I thought, there are in Halifax quite a few commemorative monuments to disasters such as the World Wars, the Halifax explosion, and the hurricane. These have also affected Black and Aboriginal peoples, which are not always included in the same memorials. And do you have any suggestions for how we could draw inspiration from these things or improve these memorials to be more inclusive in the future?
Again, I would say, who's on those commissions? Who are the people who are actually commissioning the work? Who's running the vetting process for the designers? Who's writing the brief? It's not. I mean, it's not really rocket science. It's actually having the kinds of intent to be inclusive, and that is at every level. It's not just at the design part. It's at the vetting, the writing, the commission, all of those things. That's architecture often, and it's unfortunate, but often we, as a profession, we come in last when all the decisions have been made. All the decisions about budgets, the decisions about sizes, and ROIs, and all that stuff has been sort of set in stone. We're sort of, in a sense, given the sort of final decisions, and we have to make sense of that. We have to make something physical of that. And you know, and this is, again, this is just general. This isn't always in with all firms, but this is just in general how the process works and how people understand the process to work. But I'm always of the opinion that what happens, what we should not be at the end of the process. We should be at the beginning of the process. We should be sitting down with folks when they're deciding on what it is exactly that they're trying to design or build. We should be involved in the process of figuring out or being engaged with, their conversations with, the city or the planning department or the financial sources, right? We should be part of this entire process. Because we can help, in a sense, shape that process. Hopefully we're trying to help shape it for the better, but we can do that. So let me give you an example. For example, what if a developer comes to you, right, and says, I want to do this project, I don't know, this housing project or whatever it is, right? Let's say it's a housing project. And let's say they're getting, X amount of dollars because they're going to make, put in some affordable units. And so they're getting a little extra square footage, or they're getting some money back from the city, whatever, right? They're getting some incentive. And they want you to design a project. And it's a hefty number, it seems really, this is going to be great. I got bills to pay. I got employees to pay. So fantastic. This is wonderful. But I want to know where you're getting your funding from, right? It's a fair question to ask. Like, who's funding the project? What banks are you going to? And the reason I'm asking is because I don't want to work on a project that's going to make money for a bank that doesn't reinvest in the community, that they're just going to make more money and keep people from buying homes. They're not going to allow them to have, they're not going to allow them to get mortgage loans from their banks. They're going to take that money and build more gentrified works that more people can't afford. You can miss me with that project. I don't want to work on that project. I want to work on the project, but I don't want to work with that bank. And you can find another bank, easy. You can find yourself another bank, especially if your project is good and it's going to make money. But that's a decision that, as a designer, as an architect, you get to make. And you get to say why you make that decision. I'm not going to be a tool in you to continuously threaten, a certain class of people. I'm just not going to do it. So I don't know, did that get at your question somewhat?
It was a very interesting answer.
Okay, so that means
I guess my question was aimed at, can we retroactively go back and include more of the
I don't think so. I mean, I think, it's, I don't know if you can retroactively include something that's been excluded from sort of a physical presence. I think you can move forward from there, trying to redress that with something else. But, I don't know if we could, take down the Washington Monument, right? I mean, it's there.
What I was thinking of is that our history is fragmented.
Sure.
We do have, Black memorials and white memorials, but we don't have them in the same place or about the same event.
Well, that's unfortunate. maybe in that sense, yeah, I get no, because I would argue that memorials are site specific, so you can't even pick it up and move it next to someplace. Or I think they're site specific. I just think that that's a failure, in a sense, of thinking about commemorating a particular event that that these things or these questions should have happened up front, not at the end. And that doesn't mean that, whatever is memorialized in the, let's say, the white memorial versus what is memorialized in the Black memorial has to be the same thing. They probably think about an event in a different way. But what's more powerful is to have those things in conversation with each other rather than one's on one side of the city and the other one's on the other side of the city. You never get that conversation.
Thank you.
Now that I've completely scared anybody from putting anything else in there, right? we don't have any more questions, right?
It's a fair request. Well, I have a question.
Sure.
So I'm just wondering kind of how you think about this. So I wonder, your experience kind of as an educator and in a university setting, I'm wondering, do you kind of think about universities as a place where we can kind of feel liberated to learn and teach and explore in a way that kind of shifts these narratives on race? Or do you feel like universities are institutions that kind of more uphold these power imbalances and these misrepresentations, or both? Or kind of where's your head at with that, with kind of working from in that institution?
I think it's both, actually. I think, universities they're bureaucracies. They are part of the power structure. They exist, for increasingly for reasons other than simple exploration of knowledge or questions. They are increasingly becoming more like businesses and corporations, and which often police their boundaries very tightly. But I still think that the notion, the romantic idea of the university or the college as a marketplace of ideas, as a place where you create knowledge, a place where you can ask difficult questions because those questions need to be engaged and engage them free of fear. I still think that exists. If it doesn't exist amongst, maybe the administrators, although I don't want to paint everybody with a broad brush, but I still think that academics feel that way, right? So the question becomes, is how well does your institution facilitate that kind of engagement? I'm happily at an institution that, while it has its bureaucratic tendencies, is still a very academically curious place. So these questions that we're dealing with today are things that are on the table at my institution. But interestingly enough, there was the reason that they're really on the table at our college specifically is through students. The students have sort of decided that, enough is enough. We're going to decolonize our curriculum. We're going to sort of recognize structural racism in the educational process. We're going to hold you accountable to these things. And this is happening across the country, but with varied levels of success. Some institutions are open to that. They're okay, well, maybe we should think about that. And then some institutions are trying to shut it down. I don't know how to answer that question. I think I think both are true. I think there's still that level of understanding or intention to take on really tough questions and bring students along with them, and really, sort of intellectually engage in things that, for lack of a better term, at least right now, don't have say a sort of monetary value to them. You don't have to do this because it's part of your job, or is going to keep you from making, I don't know, right? But then there are the structures that want to ask you as an instructor, well, you only have 5 people in your class, so we can't keep teaching that class, right? But that's the class that actually has all the tough conversations in it, right? So, those are the kinds of things that I think every institution has to deal with. And then there's some who deal with it better than others. Like some institutions would never tell you you only have 5 people in your class, because it's not about how many heads we have, it's about how many heads we open, right? But other institutions may not have that perspective.
Right. Yeah, that's all very interesting points. Thank you.
We have a question from Emma.
From who?
Emma Fitzgerald.
Emma, are you on, Emma? Hi, Emma. Can't hear you, although it looks like your mic is not muted, but I can't hear you. Is it just me? Can anyone hear her? No one can hear you.
I cannot.
Well, okay, let's do this. I'll leave you stay on, but let him read your question. Do you have the question?
Maybe while she's typing, we can move on to the next question.
Okay, sure.
So there's a question from Paul, and he's on.
Is he on? Paul, are you on?
I am.
All right.
Great. I was hoping you could expand a little bit on the scope of the project that you described briefly in your presentation. It's very interesting, but I couldn't get a full idea of what the scope of it is.
Sure. There is, well, this was supposed to happen last year, then, COVID changed everything. So this year, I think they're still on track for having this international Africatown design competition. They're trying to create this cultural mile in the area. And each site, there are 4 sites, and each site has 4 structures or 4 requests, let's say. So there'll be 16 elements that are available for design. I think they're supposed to roll this out this year on Juneteenth, which would be June 19th, 2021. I don't know the website offhand, but I'm sure they've updated it since. So I will just tell you, it's the just Google Africatown Design Competition, and it will take you right to that site. It's an open competition, so anybody from the most experienced designers to those who've never picked up a pencil in the world in their life are open to participating in it. And I think it's a great project for a studio. And I'm considering, where I'm going to be in that work as well. So.
Who is the sponsoring organization?
There are three. There are two local organizations, Chess, and don't get me to, Chess is an acronym. So I can't remember what it stands for. Please don't tell anybody. Burn this tape when it's over. I don't want to get in trouble. Chess is one. I don't remember the other two.
Are they locally? They are local institutions in the community?
Two are local, and then one is national. I think that's Studio Rotan. She's involved with it as well. But for the funding, I mean, those are the organizers. The funding is coming from the AIA, NOMA, state organizations. I think they even have some national historic preservation participation and private donations.
That was my next question, so thanks.
Yep. And I'm pretty sure all of that is on the website.
All right, so Emma has her question. Okay. I'm gonna read it all out.
Okay.
She said, I was lucky enough to work for architect Peter Rich in Johannesburg, who worked with the notion of translation as an act of reconciliation in architecture, focused research on the space-making principle in the Belic architecture. Oh, I don't think I pronounced that right. Could, for instance, be translated into large-scale buildings. Do you have particular inspirations you translate in your work? I noticed the use of music as an entry point for understanding the place and people. I see behind you mud cloth from West Africa. How do these interests feed your architectural work?
It's interesting. So, okay. So maybe I can do it this way. So when I was doing when I was writing my dissertation, I was interviewing a number of African-American, a number of Black architects around the country. And, I just was digging into some historical research about the question of Black architecture in the United States. Did it exist? Is it an aesthetic? Is it, what is it? Blah, 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 blah. And so one of the gentlemen I was interviewing did not buy any of that at all. He said, no, he said, I'm an architect, and that's just what I am. He said, if anything I design is Black architecture because I'm a Black architect. I said, okay, that is one position. Okay. But I sort of, that's what I thought at the time. But I sort of think of that now, not in such a derisive way. I think my cultural identity comes out in my work. I don't really see it as a thing that I try to do. It is a thing that does. So I don't look at, any kind of fabric or maybe a structure like the Dogon work or the Great Zimbabwe. I don't sort of look at those things for their formal inspiration. I look at those things for their cultural inspiration. I think about, how those things came about, not necessarily what they are. What was the thinking here? What's being communicated? Why do I feel such a call to these kinds of patterns, to these kinds of structures, to these kinds of colors? Why do I feel so connected to those? And so those kinds of things are inspirational in a sense because they are cultural. There are things that I sort of absorb, but they're not things that I sit down with a pencil and say, how can I make this look black? I don't operate that way. I think what comes out is my cultural perspective in design. Did that answer your question? Okay.
Well, thank you so much, Craig. I think we're gonna probably wrap it up. I don't think there are more questions. And thank you all so much for joining us tonight. I do want to remind you, EC, yeah?
One last question, last one.
Oh, okay, we have time for one more question, Craig?
Sure, yeah, absolutely.
It's from Barbara. She doesn't have a mic and she's on a video, so she's asking to read her question. So her question is, how can or should reparations apply to design work? Should it be similar to Canada's Trust and Reconciliation Commission, i.e. education?
I'm unfamiliar with that commission. Just the name recalls for me the South African Truth and Reconciliation Commission. So I'm assuming it's something similar to that. I don't know if reparations in design are the kinds of I think whether it's a design, I mean, I don't know what reparations in design would look like. I think the idea of reparations is broader than like a category. It's broader than whether it's design or economic or something else. I think it's something that is much more fundamental than that. I think it's much more about, maybe not only, some sort of financial compensation simply because there has been so much so many resources extracted. But there's no way you can ever, fully compensate anyone for the kinds of extractions that have gone on for centuries. So, but it doesn't mean that you can't try. So, but I think it goes more than that. It's beyond that, because if let's say you were able to financially figure out what a just compensation would be for everyone, and you provided those monies, but the structures that created the inequitable situations are still intact. So yeah, you can pay me, but if I still can't get a loan, or if I still can't get a job, or if I still can't do all these other sorts of things, or if I still, have to pay, twice as much interest on a home loan than somebody else does, then, how is that helping me any? So yes, there's a financial piece to this, but there's also a policy piece. There's a cultural piece. There is all these things have to be dismantled and rethought. So there's an educational piece. Yeah, okay, you're going to give me what, 100, let's say every person gets, $500,000, but it still costs me now, another 50 grand to send my kid to school, because now I make too much money, I can't get a loan, right? So now that's 50 grand that I should have simply to do what I want to do. But now I have to use some of that just to still live in an inequitable society. So you just get the money right back. So how is that helping me? So you have to change a lot. And it's not just the financial. So so I don't know how that operates design-wise. That's not a question. I'd have to think about that, honestly. I've never had that posed maybe it's a good question. I don't know how to answer it, and I'm sorry.
I think it's totally okay if we end this with more questions than answers. If those are all the questions, thank you so much, Craig, for joining us. Thanks everyone for joining us. I do want to remind you all that this is a lecture series that's going to continue with speakers and panelists through March of 2021. And actually our next event is in January on the 27th, and we're going to be joined by planning and public health scholar Mindy Fullilove, who is the author of Root Shock and more recently Main Street, How a Community's Heart Connects Us All. So she's going to be talking about racial inequality in planning and in urban development, and also what these kind of inequalities really mean for preserving important community places.
She's awesome. So you guys should don't miss that. She's pretty awesome.
See, I'm telling you, it's going to be a good one. And the other 2021 events of the series are going to have people like Ingrid Waldron, who many of you know, Jennifer Llewellyn, Frank Palermo, and some others. So yeah, I wanted to just say thank you so much again for joining us, and of course to the Robert H. Winters Fund for supporting these events. And we hope you're going to continue to join us for the rest of the events. So thank you so much to everyone.
Thank you, Craig.
Thank you all for having me. I appreciate it very much.
Good to see you.
Yes.
You look young.
I look young. You're sitting too far away from the screen, man.
and I have the screen on gallery. So you.
Hello.
Hi. We're old colleagues, old buddies.
Excellent.
Young
buddies. Yes, young buddies.
It's great to see you.
Yes.
Thanks so
we're
much.
gonna do a thing afterwards, so we'll let them go and then we'll do ours. Okay, ciao, people. Thank you very much. I appreciated the evening. I hope it was not too boring. So
it was great. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Ciao.